In this video, I want to talk about the distinction between a discriminated union and an enum in F#. So these are two different types that we've introduced in previous videos, and I haven't quite given you the full details of when you want to use one over the other. So in order to see that difference, let me first just define a couple of examples for these types. So we're first going to say type my type 1, and this is going to be an enum, the first type that we define. So the elements of this would be just red is equal to 0, and let me actually copy the implementation there, and then we can just paste that a couple times. And let me then do green, let's say, for the second, and blue for the last one. Right? And these ones are defined, as you know, by either an integer or any other number as sort of the definition here. In addition to this type 1, we would create another one. So we would call that type my type 2, like this, and we would make this a discriminated union now. So I could write this in the following way to make it very similar to the above. Red of unit, right? So we need to specify some type that we implement this according to, and unit would be fine for that use case. Sorry, it should say of here. There we go. I could copy this a couple times and do the same thing as we did above. So we have red, we want green as well, and blue. All right. Okay, so this should work. We could initialize two instances. For example, let A be my type 1, and we can do blue here, for example. And then we would let B be equal to my type 2. And here we would correspondingly also have blue. We need to initialize it with parentheses like this, but I could nevertheless execute this, and we'll see that we get these two types. So if I just run A here, we'll see that that is my type 1 and has a value of blue. And if I do B, we'll see that that is my type 2, blue, unit. So we get this parenthesis here because we define this to be of unit type, but that's fine. So technically speaking, we could create two nearly equivalent implementations of these types like this, and you might be unsure which one you would use in any given scenario. One thing that comes into this decision is that when you use the discriminated unions, these ones are actually better implemented with the match statement. So when you create the match statement, you would create, a number of, you would match it for example, red, green, and blue. And when you create an implementation of that for the discriminated union, you only need to define the same number of cases as you have categories defined for the union itself. F# does that type check for you. But for the enums here, if you define a match statement for red, green, and blue, you would also need to define the base case, or you would get warnings from F# saying that you have not covered all possible cases. So F# is better integrated with discriminated unions, and that's because discriminated unions are part of the F# core concepts and core language, whereas the enums are part of the larger .NET framework and are compatible also with the other .NET languages. So you might take from that you should use discriminated unions always in F#, but that's not quite the case. The reason why is discriminated unions are more complex types than enums. So depending a little bit on the information you want to encode, it can be better to use an enum for compilation times. Specifically, if you're using something very lightweight, let's say you just want to define some categories like this, red, green, and blue, and there should be no information tied to these, I would actually prefer to use an enum in that case as opposed to a discriminated union. So discriminated unions are more preferable in case you use complex data structures where you want to encode other kinds of information than these. So if red was of type, let's say, color here, and I defined a type color, I'm not going to do that now, but I could do that and then provide additional parameters, like a record with 5 parameters or something. In those cases, of course, discriminated unions are preferable because we don't have that type of functionality with the enums. But if you don't require that and you just require something very simple and lightweight, then an enum is probably a better way to go. So I would say that's the dichotomy that you should follow whenever you select these. If the code base that you're working on is perhaps using an unconventional notation where they use discriminated unions all the time, probably it's better to stick to that. But if you're creating a new code base, I would recommend to actually make use of both these concepts. Use enums whenever the information you're trying to encode is very lightweight, and discriminated unions when you need to track more information in the structures that you provide.